Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a philosopher. He's a guy you might not have heard of, but I think once we dig into his work, you'll see his ideas are pretty powerful. We're talking about Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi. Now, he was a real critic of some of the big names back in the late 1700s, early 1800s.
Yeah, he was a contemporary of some really major thinkers.
Like huge figures of the German Enlightenment.
Exactly. People like Kant, Fichte, even Schelling, they all felt the force of Jacobi's critiques.
And what I think makes Jacobi so interesting is that he wasn't just, disagreeing to disagree. Like, he wasn't just trying to be contrarian. There's a real depth to his critiques, a sense that he was deeply worried about the direction philosophy was heading in.
Absolutely. One of his core concerns was that philosophy was losing sight of something fundamental, the very essence of individual existence. He felt that systems of thought, while intellectually impressive, could end up obscuring the reality they were trying to explain.
So imagine this. You're a philosopher, right? You spent years carefully constructing a philosophical system, brick by intellectual brick. You're feeling pretty good about it. And then Jacobi comes along and asks, but wait, have we in all our system building forgotten the difference between how we think about things and how those things actually exist out in the world?
That's the crux of Jacobi's challenge. He felt that philosophy was becoming too obsessed with these really closed systems of explanation. And in doing so, it was neglecting the individual, the immediacy of experience, the fact that our being comes before our thinking about being. It's like we exist first and then try to explain it later.
And this is where Jacobi's idea of nihilism comes into play. I'll admit, when I first encountered Jacobi, I thought, oh, great, another philosopher who wants to tell us that life is meaningless.
Right.
It turns out his use of the term nihilism is a bit more specific than that.
Right. Exactly. For Jacobi, nihilism wasn't just about feeling hopeless or apathetic. It was about the potential consequences of any philosophical system that tries to explain everything without recognizing the unique, irreducible nature of individual existence. He believed these systems, while intellectually seductive, could ultimately lead to a kind of void of meaning.
Okay, so it's not just about feeling gloomy. It's about the dangers of these all-encompassing philosophical systems that try to explain everything away, leaving no room for the individual for lived experience.
Yes, exactly. It's like these systems were so busy explaining everything that they forgot about the lived experience of existing as an individual.
So he wasn't entirely against reason itself.
No, it was more about how reason was being used. He felt that these grand, all-encompassing systems, while appealing in their logical coherence, could end up stripping away the very essence of what makes us human.
To fully understand Jacobi, I guess it helps to know a bit about his life. Like, what was his background? Where did he come from?
Well, he was born in 1743. Initially, he was on track to take over the family business. They were merchants. But he had this incredible intellectual curiosity. He just gravitated toward philosophy, engaging with some of the biggest names of the time. People like Goethe, Lessing, Mendelssohn. And these weren't just polite exchanges of letters either. Jacobi was known for being pretty outspoken.
Oh, I like that. A philosopher who wasn't afraid to stir things up. I'd love to hear more about some of his interactions with those other thinkers, especially Goethe.
Well, there's the famous falling out he had with Goethe over Jacobi's novel Waldemar. Apparently, Goethe found the book's critique of the Sturm und Drang movement a bit too harsh. He even staged a mock crucifixion of the book. Talk about a literary feud.
Wow, that's intense.
And then there were the debates Jacobi had with Mendelssohn over Spinoza's philosophy. Those were less theatrical but equally intense. It really forced both sides to confront the implications of rationalism and its potential limitations.
Now, one of Jacobi's more controversial ideas is this concept of the salto mortale, the leap of faith. When I first came across that phrase, I thought, hold on, is Jacobi suddenly advocating for blind faith? But I get the feeling it's not quite that simple.
It's definitely not about blind faith or abandoning reason. Jacobi's leap of faith is more about recognizing that there are aspects of reality that we can't fully grasp through purely rational or systematic means. He argued that our immediate experience of being, that raw, unmediated sense of I exist, is the foundation upon which any philosophical system should be built, not something that needs to be explained away by the system.
So it's like he's saying, hey, we can build these elaborate systems all we want, but let's not forget that they're ultimately trying to explain something that's already present, the reality of our own existence.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that there's a kind of knowing, a kind of certainty that comes before and informs all our attempts to conceptualize and explain the world through systems of thought.
And this seems to tie into another key distinction, that Jacobi makes the difference between reason and understanding.
Absolutely. Jacobi saw reason as this faculty that allows us to directly apprehend things, both finite and infinite. It's about immediate insight, not just logical deduction. Understanding, on the other hand, is the part of us that analyzes, categorizes, and builds systems. It's about breaking things down into their component parts and trying to understand them through concepts and categories.
So reason is more about direct experience, while understanding is about conceptual analysis.
Exactly. And Jacobi's concern was that understanding, with its emphasis on system building and conceptual clarity, was becoming dominant and overshadowing the crucial role of reason. He worried that we were becoming so obsessed with dissecting and explaining the world that we were losing touch with that more immediate, intuitive way of knowing.
It's like we're so focused on examining the individual trees that we forget about the forest. Now, given all his criticisms of organized religion, you might find it surprising that Jacobi ended up advocating for a form of theism, like he believed in a personal God, distinct from the world. This is where Jacobi's philosophical journey takes an interesting turn. His theism wasn't about blindly accepting dogma or religious authority. It emerged from his broader philosophical commitments, his emphasis on individual existence, the limits of human understanding, and the importance of direct experience. He argued that we can't fully comprehend God through reason or systematic theology alone. There's a kind of leap of faith involved, a recognition that the ultimate source of being transcends our finite categories of understanding. So it's not about abandoning reason, but rather acknowledging that there are aspects of reality that defy complete rational explanation. There's a dimension of mystery that remains, even as we strive to understand.
Exactly. And that acceptance of mystery doesn't invalidate the pursuit of knowledge. It simply places it within a broader context. Jacobi is suggesting that there's a way of knowing, a way of encountering reality, that goes beyond our ability to fully conceptualize or systematize.
This is all incredibly deep stuff, and we only just scratched the surface. But I think it's crucial for our listener, as a philosopher, to understand the core of Jacobi's project. He's not just trying to tear down other philosophical systems. He's genuinely wrestling with fundamental questions about what it means to exist, how we know what we know, and the relationship between our thinking and the reality that surrounds us.
And those questions are just as relevant today as they were in Jacobi's time. We live in a world saturated with information, constantly bombarded with complex systems and explanations. Jacobi's work reminds us to pause, to ground our thinking in the reality of our own existence, and to be wary of any system that claims to have all the answers.
We've covered a lot of ground here in part one of our deep dive into Jacobi. From his critique of philosophical systems, his concept of the salto morse, his distinction between reason and understanding. But don't worry, there's still more to explore.
In part two, we'll delve deeper into Jacobi's specific critiques of thinkers like Spinoza, Kant, and Fichte, and we'll see how those critiques led him to develop his own unique perspective on knowledge, faith, and the relationship between the individual and the absolute. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi. Last time we were talking about how Jacobi was really concerned about systems of thought that kind of lose touch with individual experience, the immediacy of being.
Right, it was like those systems could be impressive, but also kind of miss the point.
Exactly, and to really get that, we need to look at how Jacobi engaged with specific philosophers.
He was super critical of
Spinoza, Kant, and Fichte.
All right, so let's start with Spinoza. My understanding is that Jacobi saw him as like the ultimate rationalist, someone who tried to explain absolutely everything with the system. You got it. Spinoza's system is so elegant, so logically rigorous, but for Jacobi, that was actually part of the problem. He felt that Spinoza's system, in its attempt to explain everything through this concept of an all-encompassing substance, well, it just erased the individual.
So for Spinoza, everything is connected, predetermined by this underlying substance. No real agency, no real freedom for people to act independently. I can see why that would bother Jacobi.
Exactly. Jacobi was deeply concerned about the implications of Spinoza's philosophy. Like if everything is ultimately an expression of this one substance, then where does that leave individual freedom? Where does it leave the possibility of moral choice? Does it even matter what we choose to do?
It seems like a very cold view of reality, one where individual existence just gets swallowed up by this grand, abstract concept.
And for Jacobi, this wasn't just an abstract philosophical problem, It was something that struck at the heart of what it meant to be human. He felt that Spinoza's system, brilliant as it might be, denied the unique dignity and the inherent value of each individual.
So how does this critique of Spinoza connect to Jacobi's critique of Kant? They seem like such different thinkers. Kant, after all, really emphasized the human mind in shaping our experience of reality.
And that's where things get really interesting. Jacobi saw a surprising connection between Spinoza's deterministic system and Kant's transcendental idealism. You see, he argued that both systems, in their own ways, limited the scope of true freedom and individual existence.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following. How could Kant, who stressed the mind's active role in shaping our experience, be seen as contributing to determinism?
Well, think about it this way. Kant makes this distinction between the phenomenal world, the world as we experience it, and the noumenal world, the world of things in themselves, which we can never truly know. Jacobi argued that by putting the noumenal realm outside the reach of human knowledge, Kant was building a wall.
So even though Kant emphasized the mind's active role, he still ended up limiting our access to a realm of reality that exists independently of our minds.
Precisely. And for Jacobi, that had really big implications for freedom. If we're stuck in this phenomenal world, shaped by the categories of our understanding, how can we be sure that our actions are actually free? What if they're just determined by the structure of our own minds?
So we're trapped in a mental matrix, unable to break free from our own perception and really encounter the world as it is.
That's a great way to put it. And for Jacobi, this wasn't just a theoretical issue, it had real consequences. If we can't be sure of our own freedom, then morality, responsibility, meaningful action, all of that starts to fall apart.
So he saw both Spinoza and Kant in their own ways as kind of undermining genuine freedom and the importance of the individual.
Exactly. He believed both systems could lead to a type of determinism that ultimately made individual existence less significant. And that's where his idea of the salto mortale, the leap of faith, becomes so important.
Right, we talked about that a bit in part one. It's about recognizing a way of knowing that goes beyond our ability to fully understand or systematize things.
That's right. It's not about ditching reason altogether. It's about recognizing its limits and being open to other ways of engaging with reality, ways that are grounded in experience, intuition, and a willingness to accept that some things might always remain mysterious.
So it's not about giving up on thinking. It's about being aware that thinking alone might not get us all the way there. Which brings us to Fichte. Now, he took Kant's ideas and really pushed them in a radical direction. Jacobi was probably not too thrilled about that.
Let's just say that Jacobi saw Fichte as the embodiment of everything he had been warning against. He actually accused Fichte of promoting a philosophy of nihilism, even calling it inverted Spinozism.
Inverted Spinozism. That's a bold statement. What did he mean by that?
Well, think about Spinoza's system. Substance is at the center. It's the foundation of everything. Jacobi argued that Fichte essentially flipped that, making the I, the thinking subject, the ultimate source of everything.
So instead of everything coming from this one impersonal substance, as in Spinoza for Fichte, everything comes from the I.
Exactly. And while that might seem completely different from Spinoza, Jacobi saw it as just another form of determinism. Instead of being determined by substance, we're now determined by the structure and activity of our own minds.
It's like switching one prison for another. Whether it's substance or the I, the individual is still trapped in a system that denies true freedom.
That's the core of Jacobi's critique. He felt that Fichte's system took the issues he saw in Spinoza and Kant to a whole new level. It was a philosophy that, in his view, blurred the lines between the individual and the absolute, and that led to a kind of intellectual and existential emptiness.
So Jacobi's critiques of Spinoza, Kant, and Fichte are all connected by this concern about philosophical systems potentially undermining individual freedom and the importance of lived experience.
Exactly. He saw these systems, despite their intellectual brilliance, as leading to a kind of philosophical dead end. And that's precisely where his concept of the salto mortale comes in.
Right, it's about recognizing that there are ways of knowing that go beyond our ability to fully conceptualize or systematize things.
That's it. It's not about abandoning reason. It's about recognizing its limitations and being open to other ways of experiencing reality, ways that are rooted in direct experience, in intuition, and in accepting that some things will always remain mysterious.
This is also fascinating, but I imagine our listener, as a fellow philosopher, might be asking, okay, Jacobi's made these critiques, but what does he offer in place of these systems? What's his positive philosophical vision?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll see how Jacobi's critiques led him to develop his own unique perspective on knowledge, faith, and the relationship between the individual and the absolute.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi. We've really been going deep, haven't we?
Yeah, no kidding. We've been exploring Jacobi's discomfort with these big philosophical systems, how he felt they kind of missed the importance of individual experience and just direct encounter with reality.
And then we got into his critiques of some really big thinkers, Spinoza, Kant, Fichte.
Exactly. He really took them to task.
So I think our listener, being a philosopher themselves, is probably wondering what Jacobi proposes as an alternative. It can't just be about critiquing everyone else.
Right. It's not just about tearing things down. He had a real vision, a positive one. You see, Jacobi was really concerned with what it meant to be human, individual existence, real freedom, the possibility of connecting to something bigger than ourselves. And he felt we needed a different way of doing philosophy to really understand those things, one that was less focused on systems and more grounded in experience.
So where does he go with that? What are some of the key ideas he offers as alternatives to those systems?
Well, one of the most important is the distinction he makes between reason and understanding. We've touched on this before. Remember, Jacobi saw reason as this power of direct insight, immediate apprehension, not just logic. And understanding was about analyzing, categorizing, building systems. He thought philosophy had become way too focused on understanding and that we'd lost sight of the importance of reason.
So it's about finding the right balance between the two. We need both reason and understanding, but we can't let understanding, with all its systems, take over completely.
Right, exactly. For Jacobi, that direct experience, that intuition, that's the basis of all knowledge. We can use our understanding to explore and explain that reality, but we always have to remember that first encounter with being that happens before we even try to put it into words.
I'm starting to see how this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. It has implications for how we live our lives.
Absolutely. Think about how much time we spend in our heads analyzing everything and how often we lose touch with the experience of just being in the world. Or we build these elaborate models and forget to check if they actually reflect reality.
We get so caught up in the details, we can't see the big picture anymore.
That's it. And Jacobi is saying sometimes we need to step back from all the analysis, just be present, and trust that basic sense of knowing that comes before all our explanations.
And this connects to his idea of faith, which we've talked about a little bit. I know that word has a lot of baggage for some people. And it's true that Jacobi was a theist. But his idea of faith seems different from just blindly accepting things.
Yeah, it's not about blind faith or following some authority. For Jacobi, faith was about recognizing that there's a kind of knowing that goes beyond our concepts. We can access it through reason, that direct experience, but we can't fully grasp it or explain it with our understanding.
So it's acknowledging that some things, maybe the existence of God or even the fact that we exist at all, can't be completely understood through logic or reason alone. It takes a different kind of knowing, a leap beyond the limits of our systems.
Exactly. And that's a tough idea for a lot of philosophers, especially those who really believe in the power of reason. But Jacobi is saying, hey, it's not about giving up on reason. It's about realizing it's not the only way to know things.
It sounds like there's a real humility in that kind of faith. Accepting that we don't have all the answers, that there are mysteries we might never solve.
Absolutely. And Jacobi would say that embracing that mystery isn't weakness, it's a strength. It lets us be open to reality instead of trying to force it to fit into our little boxes.
So if you were to boil down Jacobi's philosophy, what would you say are the key takeaways, especially for our listener, a fellow philosopher?
I think he's reminding us to approach knowledge with a sense of humility, to remember that our understanding will always be limited and that there are things we may never fully understand. He's saying, trust your intuition, trust your direct experience, and be wary of systems that get so big they forget what they're supposed to be explaining.
It's about balancing reason and understanding.
Yes, using both, but not letting one completely take over. And maybe most importantly, Jacobi reminds us to never lose that sense of wonder, to be curious, to be open to the mysteries of existence. That's what got us into philosophy in the first place, right?
That's a great way to put it. I think Jacobi would be happy with that. He was a philosopher who never stopped asking questions. He never stopped exploring, and he never lost that sense of wonder. And on that note, we'll bring this deep dive into the world of Friedrich Heinrich Jacobi to a close. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it thought-provoking and maybe even a little bit inspiring.